The chamber rose like a cathedral of alien design, its arches bending in ways that defied human instinct, lit by a kaleidoscope of shifting colors meant to comfort the countless species gathered there. Yet the air was heavy, not with reverence but with unease. Every seat was filled, every representative posturing in their way, scaled beings twitching tails against the floor, avians fluffing feathers in agitation, insectoids tapping mandibles in nervous cadence. The center of the chamber, once a symbol of collective will, now resembled a battlefield where no weapon had yet been fired. At one side, the human delegation sat still. They were fewer in number than many of the elder races, but their presence drew eyes as if gravity itself leaned toward them. Humanity had joined the council later than most, arriving after centuries of wars had already drawn maps and established hierarchies. They were seen at first as outsiders, then as useful fighters, then as dangerous equals. Their reputation had been forged in the fire of survival. Other species were raised on lush, stable worlds, while humans came from a crucible of predators, shifting climates, and endless conflict. That origin was never forgotten, not by the Council and not by humanity itself. The agenda moved with false politeness. Reports of piracy, disputes over trade lanes, accusations of espionage, each one was spoken with elaborate ceremony, each voice weighted with vanity. Beneath the decorum was rot, the kind that spread unseen until the structure collapsed. The Council prided itself on rules and protocols, yet those same rules were wielded as tools of dominance by the powerful against the weak. Petitions from minor species were smothered by procedure. Crimes committed by influential empires were buried under endless debate. Justice was cited as a principle but rarely delivered as practice. Human delegates had tolerated this pattern for years, waiting, pushing back, warning when hypocrisy turned to outright cruelty. Their restraint was never mistaken for weakness, though the Council pretended otherwise. Words from human mouths carried an edge of finality that no one could ignore. To some species it was arrogance, to others it was the uncomfortable sound of truth spoken without decoration. When humans rose to speak, silence followed, not out of respect, but out of a primal instinct that told every creature in the room they were listening to predators in disguise. The latest debate revealed the fracture more clearly than ever. A human colony on the fringe had been harassed repeatedly by raiding fleets. Survivors pleaded for recognition, for security, for action. Evidence was presented: burned homes, mutilated civilians, charred fragments of orbital habitats. The human ambassador laid the images before the chamber with a steady hand, describing not only the attack but the identity of those responsible, an ally species of the Council's more dominant bloc. The expectation was clear: justice demanded reprisal or at least sanction. Instead, the hall erupted with dismissal. Delegates from the implicated species denied everything, twisting words into smokescreens. Allies spoke in circles, claiming the evidence was inconclusive or misinterpreted. Others nodded along, eager to avoid entanglement. Motions were raised not to intervene but to delay further action, to form investigative committees, to let the issue fade into the endless backlog where countless cries for help had died before. The human delegation listened in silence. Their ambassador leaned back, hands clasped, expression unreadable. The vote was called, and with the efficiency of corruption, the Council chose in favor of delay. The decision was dressed in legality, justified with precedent, but everyone in the chamber felt the lie. The truth was simpler: the Council was afraid of punishing one of its own, and humanity was not yet considered powerful enough to force its will. In that moment, a shift passed through the chamber. Representatives who had once dismissed humanity glanced at them with fleeting worry. The humans did not shout. They did not threaten. They did not storm from the room. They sat, perfectly still, their silence colder than any outburst could have been. The predators had been ignored, and in ignoring them, the Council had chosen arrogance over survival. The ambassador finally spoke, not with anger, but with measured calm. The words carried no overt threat, yet every syllable cut sharper than steel. He thanked the chamber for its clarity. He acknowledged the vote as lawful. He noted that humanity understood the Council's priorities. Then he sat down. No more was said, yet the weight of those words lingered. The message was not what was spoken but what was left unsaid. Around the chamber, some species exchanged uneasy looks. They remembered past wars, ancient battles where humans had bled without hesitation, where their resolve had bent but never broken. Others smirked, pretending relief, telling themselves the humans were cornered by politics. But most felt something they could not explain, a tightening in the chest, a pressure at the base of the skull, as though instinct whispered a truth the mind refused to admit. The council moved on to the next item of business, desperate to return to routine, but the illusion had cracked. In every speech that followed, in every vote cast, the shadow of human silence stretched across the chamber. For all their numbers and wealth, no empire in that hall felt secure. They had crossed a line they could not yet see, but all could feel. The predators had been slighted, and predators did not forgive. The weeks that followed blurred into unease, each day marked by reports that grew more harrowing. The colony of Kesson Prime, a frontier settlement far from the protection of core fleets, became the stage for devastation. What had been a thriving outpost of farms, research hubs, and orbital docks was reduced to a landscape of ash and silence. Images smuggled out by fleeing transports showed structures collapsed into molten skeletons, homes gutted by firestorms, and civilians fleeing into forests only to vanish under the strafing runs of marauders. The perpetrators were no mystery. Their ships bore the distinctive drives of a council-aligned species, one protected by powerful allies. Their leaders denied involvement, yet fragments of their own military insignias were recovered from wreckage. When survivors arrived at secure human space, their testimony spread like fire. Children who had hidden in basements and emerged into ruins spoke with voices cracked by smoke. Farmers described raiders pulling them from their shelters and executing them as examples. Orbital controllers relayed the last moments of their stations, screaming into comms before atmospheres vented them into void. Humanity had suffered war before, but this was not a clash of armies. It was deliberate, targeted brutality meant to test how far the council would let its favored members go. The human ambassador carried the accounts into the chamber. His words were stripped of embellishment. He spoke in precise detail, presenting wreckage logs, biometric scans of victims, and intercepted transmissions identifying the attackers. Each point was laid out with the discipline of a prosecutor. He asked not for vengeance but for recognition, for acknowledgement that the law applied equally. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy as though the chamber itself weighed the evidence. Then the excuses began. Delegates murmured about jurisdictional disputes, questioned the authenticity of the recordings, and suggested that pirates may have fabricated council signatures. Others argued that if humans had placed colonies so near disputed territories, they had invited danger upon themselves. There was talk of forming a commission, of waiting for independent verification. No promise of protection was offered, no commitment of fleets, no sanctions proposed. The decision was to issue statements condemning violence in abstract terms while avoiding any direct reference to the guilty species. The human delegation did not erupt. Their composure was unnerving. The ambassador simply nodded as if tallying debts in an invisible ledger. His voice, low and unshaken, cut through the chamber. He stated that humanity had heard the ruling, had witnessed the priorities of those seated at the table, and would act accordingly. The words themselves were polite, almost deferential, yet every representative who listened felt the skin prickle of something buried beneath them. Reactions among the other delegations fractured. Some smirked with relief, mistaking calm for surrender. Others exchanged sharp looks, recognizing the danger in such measured restraint. A few whispered warnings to their aides, recalling histories of wars where humans had endured worse and answered with overwhelming resolve. Yet even those who knew did not raise their voices. It was easier to accept the council's convenient ruling than to confront the predators they had pushed into silence. Outside the chamber, news spread quickly. Human networks broadcast the footage of Kesson Prime across their colonies, not with dramatic narration but with raw images. The effect was devastating. Citizens demanded accountability. Veterans of past wars spoke openly of betrayal. Families of the dead erected monuments not only to remember but to accuse. The call for action was not shouted in rage but spoken in quiet determination, the kind that does not burn out but calcifies into resolve. Back in the council, the absence of human protest was more terrifying than any threat could have been. Their delegation stopped engaging in debates, offering no comments on trade disputes or border issues. They attended sessions, sat silently, and left without a word. Then, one day, their seats were empty. The flags of Earth and her colonies were removed, their emblems gone from the chamber. The council clerks noted the withdrawal in official records, but no explanation was delivered. Humanity had simply left the table. The impact was immediate. Petty arguments continued, but every discussion circled back to the same unease. What did it mean that humanity no longer cared to participate? To some, it was a victory. The troublesome predators had removed themselves, leaving politics easier to manipulate. Yet beneath the surface, the truth spread like a current none could resist. If humans no longer sought justice through words, then they would seek it through means no treaty could restrain. The council had not tamed them, it had released them. Whispers circulated in the halls of power. Diplomats avoided eye contact when the subject of humans arose. Military analysts drafted reports in secret, projecting what humanity might do with its fleets if freed from oversight. Every empire remembered the images from Kesson Prime, and behind every denial, every dismissal, lay the same thought gnawing at them all. Humanity had endured humiliation without fury. They had swallowed betrayal without explosion. That restraint was not mercy. It was the pause before something greater. When the human delegation vanished from the chamber, the galaxy expected outrage, proclamations, or at least demands. None came. Messages sent to Earth's envoys returned without response. Trade representatives arrived at human embassies only to find them shuttered, offices cleared, terminals wiped clean. Within weeks, it was as though an entire civilization had sealed its borders with an invisible wall. Shipping routes that once bustled with convoys went dark, their patrol escorts recalled. Border stations no longer answered routine traffic requests. The silence was suffocating. At first, rival empires congratulated themselves. Without humanity at the table, votes passed more smoothly, objections evaporated, and political games resumed without interruption. Yet even in those early days there were cracks in their confidence. The predators who had stood eye to eye with elder races were gone, and their absence felt like a storm building somewhere just out of sight. Council members whispered that perhaps humans had realized their limits, that their anger had burned out. They told themselves absence meant weakness. But absence proved more disturbing than defiance. Reports from frontier sectors began to surface, unverified accounts of human fleets withdrawing from known patrol lines, not redeploying elsewhere but disappearing entirely. Intelligence agencies sent probes into human systems only to find comms blacked out and transponders offline. Merchant vessels that ventured into human space returned back without explanation, guided silently to the edge of borders by escorts that never identified themselves. No threats, no ultimatums, no declarations. Just walls of silence, and the occasional glimpse of ships watching from the dark. For a species accustomed to noise, the quiet became unbearable. Humans had always spoken plainly, too plainly for many, with blunt honesty that cut through layers of diplomatic theater. Now there was nothing. No voice to argue, no face to glare across the chamber, no presence to gauge by tone or expression. The council had mocked them as unpredictable before, but unpredictability was tolerable when it came with visible signals. This new void left everyone guessing, and the guessing turned quickly to fear. Rumors spread like infection. On one world, a trader swore he had seen construction yards spanning entire moons in human territory, fleets of warships taking shape in silence. On another, a diplomat claimed whispers of experimental weapons capable of erasing fleets before they fired a shot. None of it could be verified, because no one could pierce the barrier of silence to confirm. Every story contradicted the next, but the contradictions only deepened the dread. If no one knew the truth, then anything was possible. Attempts to reach out were met with nothing. Couriers carried formal letters of apology, offers of inquiry, even secret promises of reparations, but none were acknowledged. Envoys risked crossing borders and were never seen again. It was not war, because no battles were fought. It was not peace, because no trust remained. It was a condition no species in the Council had encountered before, a total withdrawal into shadows by a civilization known for ferocity when provoked. The silence became strategy. Rivals who had once laughed now kept fleets closer to home. Trade routes were adjusted to skirt human sectors, even when it cost fortunes. Smaller species, once quick to deride Earth's bluntness, now begged their allies for reassurance. Analysts presented endless theories, but all concluded with the same grim line: humans were preparing for something, and no one could know what. In council halls, discussions of taxation or border treaties always drifted back to the same subject. Every speech ended with a pause, a hesitation, a glance at the empty chairs where humans once sat. It became clear that the council had not rid itself of troublemakers but had created a phantom presence more dangerous than participation had ever been. The predators no longer roared in the open, they hunted unseen, and that was far worse. The fear grew not from what humanity did, but from what it chose not to do. A predator that bares its teeth announces its intent. A predator that watches in silence leaves its prey sleepless, imagining claws in the dark. By withdrawing, humanity had stripped away certainty. In that uncertainty, the galaxy found its first taste of real terror. The illusion of control began to unravel when the aggressor species, emboldened by the Council's protection, struck again. This time, their fleets moved deeper, raiding not only human colonies but neighboring trade routes, as if daring humanity to respond. The Council continued with its endless debates, issuing toothless statements and pretending that silence equaled surrender. For a brief moment, many convinced themselves that humanity's absence was proof of impotence. That belief shattered in a single night. Without warning, fleets belonging to the raiders ceased transmitting. Long-range sensors reported them massed near their homeworlds, preparing another push, and then their signatures disappeared entirely. At first, analysts claimed it was a systems malfunction, but confirmations poured in from a dozen sectors. Fleets that should have numbered in the thousands had vanished from every chart. Panic spread when merchant convoys sent distress signals describing shadows falling upon them. Immense human warships that arrived without comms, executed precision strikes, and were gone before countermeasures could even deploy. There was no declaration, no ceremony, no prelude. Humanity had not come to negotiate, they had come to dismantle. Entire flotillas dissolved under coordinated attacks, stations burned in silence, and supply lines collapsed. The method was unlike any campaign the Council had studied. Where other species sought occupation, humanity sought erasure. Every strike was surgical, calculated to cripple military capacity while avoiding needless entanglement. Yet the cold efficiency of it struck deeper terror than indiscriminate slaughter ever could. Council chambers erupted in chaos as reports streamed in. Delegates shouted across the hall, some demanding immediate sanctions, others begging for defensive coalitions, but none could disguise the fear in their voices. The intelligence logs showed patterns. Human fleets appeared without detectable entry signatures, striking in multiple systems simultaneously, then vanishing as if swallowed by the void. For generations, the Council had boasted of technological superiority, but no one could explain how humans moved unseen or why their strategies seemed designed years in advance. The aggressor species pleaded for protection, but their allies faltered. No one wished to send fleets into battles they knew they could not win. Worlds that had once laughed at human complaints now faced broadcasts of burning skies, their citizens staring at images of destroyed armadas with disbelief. The lesson was carved into every transmission: humanity's patience had limits, and those limits had been crossed. Old warnings resurfaced. Military historians reminded the chamber of doctrines humans had spoken of in passing, philosophies that others had dismissed as bravado. One phrase circulated like a curse: "We do not forgive genocide, and we do not forget." The reality of that doctrine now played out in real time. Every attempt to reach humanity's commanders ended in silence. There were no ultimatums, no avenues for surrender, no gestures of compromise. They had made their judgment, and they were carrying it out without hesitation. Delegates who had once mocked human bluntness now trembled as they considered the implications. If humanity had chosen not to retaliate through the Council but through its own hand, then the Council itself had become irrelevant. Power no longer resided in endless debates, but in the fleets no one could stop. Some suggested assembling a united armada to deter them, but even in whispered discussions, the proposal collapsed. None trusted that their navies would survive contact, and none wanted to be the first to test humanity's resolve. As worlds fell silent one after another, the chamber filled not with unity but with dread. Every species calculated the distance from their own borders to human space. Every leader wondered if their past words, their dismissive gestures, their cowardly votes, had placed them next on an unseen list. The terror did not lie only in the destruction itself but in the realization that humanity gave no explanation. Their silence was louder than any war cry, their strikes more eloquent than any speech. By the time the last fleets of the aggressor species were erased, no one doubted what had happened. Humanity had chosen judgment, and they had executed it with precision that left no room for mercy. The chamber sat paralyzed, watching hollow feeds of annihilated armadas and burning homeworld skies, knowing they had created this outcome. The predators had shown their fangs, and the galaxy finally understood what it meant to provoke them. The erasure of the aggressor species did not end with a triumphant declaration or a return to politics. Their fleets were gone, their stations reduced to drifting wrecks, their colonies turned to graveyards lit only by the glow of burning atmospheres. The Council waited for demands, for statements, for some signal that humanity would return to the fold once its vengeance was sated. None came. Weeks passed, and their seats in the chamber remained vacant, their banners absent, their voice forever silent. That silence weighed heavier than all the destruction. Trade resumed hesitantly through the lanes near human borders, but every vessel that ventured close described the same thing: patrols of massive ships, watching without transmitting a single word. They neither threatened nor welcomed, simply shadowed the intruders until they withdrew. The message was unmistakable: humanity had no interest in conversation. They were present, they were vigilant, and they would not be approached. Even the bravest captains returned shaken, speaking of a cold, clinical presence in the void that made them feel like prey under the gaze of something they could not understand. Within the Council, debates turned poisonous. Some argued that humanity had set a precedent that would unravel the entire balance of power, while others insisted they had always been an anomaly, never truly part of the order the chamber represented. But every delegate, no matter how loudly they spoke, cast furtive glances toward the empty space where humans once sat. It had become a symbol, not of weakness, but of abandonment. The predators had walked away, and now every species left behind had to wonder whether their own actions might someday draw the same judgment. Smaller civilizations whispered openly that the Council's authority had collapsed. If the most powerful body in the galaxy could not restrain one species, what use were its laws or decrees? Larger empires tried to project confidence, but their words rang hollow when paired with the desperate redeployment of fleets to home systems. The aggressors' fate was studied in grim detail: how their worlds had been dismantled without a single broadcast or negotiation, how every trace of their fleets had vanished without survivors, how humanity had finished its work and then withdrawn without explanation. It was not conquest. It was warning. Across the stars, populations reacted with dread. Merchants avoided human space entirely, even at great cost. Refugees from species allied to the aggressors lived in constant fear, wondering if humanity's wrath would extend to them. On frontier colonies, children asked if the humans would come for them next, while leaders offered reassurances they themselves did not believe. The galaxy had long prided itself on understanding patterns, on calculating the moves of rivals, on playing the game of politics with certainty. Humanity had shattered that illusion. By leaving the table, they had made themselves unknowable, and the unknowable is what frightened all species most. In quiet moments, counselors admitted what none dared to speak aloud in session: humanity no longer needed them. They had mastered survival without permission, built fleets without oversight, and chosen silence over diplomacy. The chamber had become irrelevant to them, a relic of compromise and cowardice. What unsettled every delegate was the realization that if humanity viewed the Council as irrelevant, they might eventually decide the Council itself was dangerous. And if that judgment came, no alliance, no fleet, no law would save them. The final reports described a site near the galactic rim, an armada larger than anything ever recorded, human vessels arrayed in disciplined silence, their weapons cold but ready, their course unknown. Scouts who glimpsed them returned shaken, unable to articulate the weight of what they had seen. The fleets did not broadcast, did not explain, did not threaten. They simply existed, a wall of steel and silence on the edge of known space. In the chamber, one frail ambassador from a minor species asked the question no one wanted voiced: what happens if humanity decides the Council itself is guilty? The hall fell into absolute stillness. No one answered. No one could. The galaxy had watched in terror as humanity abandoned the table, and in that abandonment, they had revealed a truth far more frightening than war. Predators that no longer cared to be part of the pack could choose to hunt alone, and nothing in the stars could stop them.